Okay, so let's discuss food and biodiversity, which is our week 11 content. Okay. Um, so week 11, here we are, food and biodiversity, another really big, important, relatable topic. We all eat food, of course. Hopefully many of you grow some of your own food. But we're going to talk about sort of some implications of farming techniques and looking at things, biodiversity and the impact on biodiversity of human activity, the benefits of biodiversity. Um, so biodiversity is a really important topic. You've probably heard about it in the news. It has kind of, bubbled up to the surface because people are realizing that we are suffering through biodiversity loss and, you know, all over the place. And it's almost entirely due to human activity. We'll look at some of those this week. And so we'll look at ecosystems and something called ecosystem services, which is a really key term. And it's just any benefit that nature provides to humans. So if you think about all of the things that nature does for us, um, of course they don't charge us. So everything from, I don't know, providing oxygen for us to breathe and survive. That's one of the big things. Obviously, we don't make our own oxygen. That's done by photosynthetic organisms. Everything from soil to provide our food, soil to filter toxins, um, wood to provide, all of the materials that we talked about the other week, from paper to wood to other things. Other natural resources that we use, valuable minerals and metals and things like that. So there are just, honeybees, they pollinate something like I can't remember the number, but a very significant portion of our food. So nature does a lot of things for us. Um, and this kind of goes back to an earlier lesson, the whole, externalities and talking about how nature is invisible to the modern economic system. And these ecosystem services have humongous financial benefits, but they're not counted toward GDP or anything else. So they're invisible. Um, but they do provide absolutely essential life-saving, life-giving services. So, and obviously from a sustainability perspective, we want to maintain biodiversity and try not to harm the natural environment and species and so forth. But just for our own sake, if we want to sustain our own lives and all of our systems that we've built over the millennia, we need to keep these ecosystem services intact. So very important concept. Then we'll look at monoculture farming, which is often called factory farming. Well, it's called by some people factory farm, but really it is when, so you think of the prefix mono meaning one, and culture like agriculture. So it's like cultivating a single species over a huge swath of land. So if you think of like a giant cornfield down in southern Delaware or like the entire Midwest of the United States, that's monoculture. It's just a single crop for, in that case, miles and miles and miles. And we'll look at some of the drawbacks. I mean, nature does not do that. I mean, think about, you go anywhere, go out to a field or a forest, or even your lawn, that you even though you try to maintain it, you notice there's a whole bunch of different species there. But then you get to truly natural systems like forests, like prairies, and so forth. I mean, they are just bursting with biodiversity. So, and they're not in that like a long linear rows and all the same species, and that's very unnatural. And there's a lot of negative impacts from that, especially in terms of biodiversity. And also, I mean, you start digging into that and, you grow crops like that, it's very unnatural. So pests love monoculture because it's just, if you have a pest that likes corn, it's like miles and miles of corn. So they're like, this is just amazing, It's like a smorgasbord for them. It's just corn as far as the eye can see. And so if you have, pests that attack corn, it's like it's impossible to fight them naturally. And so that's what do? They spray a bunch of pesticides or they develop these genetically modified corn that they could spray pesticides on. I mean, and what the pesticides do is they kill all the pests. And then there's herbicides, and what does that do? That kills all of the plant. It's indiscriminate. And so that has a lot of really negative impacts on biodiversity. I mean, it's literally designed to kill organisms. And so monoculture is very damaging to biodiversity, but it is largely how we produce our food. And then we'll look at something called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. And so that's really factory farming normally refers to that. I apologize, I misspoke earlier. So factory farming is, again, it's very unnatural. Animals do not congregate in, generally speaking, in, thousands and thousands of animals in one area, just penned up there, not moving. Now, there are herds, of course, of, whatever species, historically and contemporarily, but they roam around large swaths of the area. With the concentrated animal feeding operations, it's just like a fenced in, unnaturally huge number of animals all in the same place. And there's a lot of really negative impacts of this. Among them, you have to feed them antibiotics because they're always sick because they're in such close quarters. And something like 70% of all, 70% of all antibiotics are given to animals. But there's also things called superbugs, which if you're, for those of you in the nursing field, I'm sure have heard of these. But these antibiotic resistant bacteria, how do they develop? Well, if you keep throwing antibiotics at something constantly, it's going to kill a lot of the bacteria, but the ones that survive, guess what? They're the ones that are really good at resisting the antibiotic. And so then you have these superbugs that actually kill a lot of people. I can't remember the number. A lot of people, and it could actually be the source of pandemics moving forward too. So there's a lot of really negative implications. And just from an animal welfare perspective, it's awful for the animals. I mean, they're not meant to live that way. And there's chickens in cages and gestation cages for baby for calves. I mean, there's just a lot of awful things from animal welfare. So, and then we'll look at colony collapse disorder, which is something that's been happening for 15, 20 years now, where these honeybees are just dying off all over the place. It's not 100% certainty what's causing it, but it's almost certainly from a pesticide that's commonly used, but largely banned in Europe because they have the precautionary principle. Whereas in the US, we're dominated by the chemical industry. It's called industry capture. But and then we'll briefly look at a couple of different types of irrigation and how that can reduce water usage. So center pivot, low energy spray, and drip irrigation. And then finally, we'll end with some really stark and sad articles about how there are effectively modern day slaves in a couple of industries. They've actually freed a bunch of slaves in Florida, if you can believe that or not. Now they've done a better job recently, but people were basically being held captive to work on farms in Florida, migrants. And then there's still going on all across the world. So that's another reason, that Marine Stewardship Council would be one way to know that your shrimp is not raised by slaves. So a couple of articles there. That's obviously really bad for, from a social perspective. So, yeah, so that's your food and biodiversity, another really big, important topic. Hopefully you learned something and sort of like can relate to a lot of this. And I look forward to discussing with you. And of course, if you have any questions, reach out.